I guess we will go ahead and get started. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew Cowell. I'm faculty at CU Boulder in the linguistics department, and I wanted to talk today about how would you go about annotating a polysynthetic agglutinating language in UMR, and I'm going to use Arapaho, which is a language I've worked on a lot, as an example of this. And I'm trying to talk from multiple perspectives today. One of them would be, I don't know if anyone in the room is a speaker of a polysynthetic agglutinating language, native or a good speaker, but you might want to do that yourself. But also, most likely you're not probably a speaker of one of those languages, and how do you approach this as someone who's doing research on a language which is not your own, or potentially which you don't know that well, initially speaking. And then the other perspective I want us to keep in mind is that most languages in the world are under-resourced, and I would say virtually every polysynthetic and agglutinating language, other than possibly Turkish and Finnish, are under-resourced as well. And so as you're doing research on one of these languages, you need to be thinking about the fact that they are not just under-resourced in terms of UMR, but that hopefully these resources are going to be usable beyond the scope of UMR. And I think that's something important to keep in mind for a language which you may be the only person working on. So, and as part of the implications of what I just said is, UMR is a semantic annotation tool, but at the same time, ideally it relies on a lexicon, but for almost any polysynthetic agglutinating language, there's not going to be a lexicon. So as you do the UMR annotation, you are also creating a lexicon. And I think that's something really important to keep in mind in terms of the idea of under-resourced. Is your lexicon going to be an actual linguistically valuable lexicon as opposed to just kind of a hacked together lexicon that worked in UMR but doesn't work anywhere else? And so I think that's something I want to think about as well in this presentation. Some key points, kind of what I just said, right? That we're talking about these kind of languages typologically in general. I'm going to try to avoid any super specific things related to Algonquian languages. Again, you're creating a lexicon as well as annotating text. I'm also going to stress here that you do need to have a basic understanding of and ability to remove abstract morphology to really make this work. And that relates especially to the lexicon, but this is a general issue. And finally, I will talk about lexical morphology as opposed to more abstract morphology, and how that has to be handled in slightly, in fact, quite different ways sometimes from the more abstract morphology we're going to talk about. So really quickly, Arapaho is a Native American language. It's in the Algonquian language family. All the languages in the family are polysynthetic, by which I mean they have conceptually complex words with two or more concrete meaning components. That's lexical meanings. And they're also all agglutinating, which is adding prefixes, suffixes, infixes, circumfixes, et cetera, et cetera. So there's just really quickly a map of the Algonquian languages in North America, and Arapaho is in this little cluster right here. As you can see, Cree, Ojibwe, and Blackfoot is over here, and also East Coast languages such as Massachusetts, Micmac, Abenaki, and so forth and so on. So a very widespread family, and everything I'm going to say today is applicable to the entire family. So additional key issues here. AMR and UMR are both intended, as I think everybody knows by this point, as semantic annotation tools. So in principle, they're seeking to ignore word internal morphology, and also pragmatics, as I say. And they're conceived of specifically as word annotation tools. AMR is basically for English, and has been adapted, and UMR is not basically for English, but nevertheless, because it's built on AMR, has inherited a lot of internal assumptions about what kind of languages you're going to use it with. That's not to say that they're completely English-based. Obviously, UMR recognizes Prodoc languages, such as Spanish. It recognizes the existence of multi-word expressions. So it's not a mindless, word-by-word annotation tool. But nevertheless, it has built into it a lot of biases that come from having been developed around Spanish and English and Chinese and Arabic and similar kinds of languages. Again, as I said earlier, ideally you want to have a lexicon to use with UMR annotation, but almost certainly you're not going to have one if you're working on an agglutinating polysynthetic language. And when you're engaging with a new language without such a lexicon, the guidelines assume that the language worker may not understand the internal morphology of the language, and they suggest a first-pass approach that treats each word as a new lexical item. That's not going to work. I'll just tell you right now for this kind of a language. So what do we mean by polysynthesis in Arapaho? So I'm going to talk about polysynthesis for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then talk about the agglutinating aspects for the other 10 or 15 minutes, and show you some actual UMR graphs of how to solve these problems with this language. In Arapaho, most verbs are bimorphemic. And I'll show you some examples. And Arapaho uses a lot of nominal incorporation, and that can include subject-like things, such as the wood is strong or the wood is weak. Object-like things, I'm stealing horses, I'm feeding horses, I'm watering horses. It can include means of action, so I'm lowering someone by rope, I'm searching for something with a stick, by poking, that kind of thing. It also includes things like natural forces, so something was destroyed by fire, something was destroyed by wind, and so forth and so on. And I'll talk about both of these issues. It also has verbal classifiers, which are distinct from noun incorporation, and I want to talk a little bit about the implications of that distinction. So to get right to some examples, here are some typical Arapaho verbs. So I am walking downwards, hana usano, I'm walking upwards, naha usano, or I'm walking around smelling stinky, wakabu usano. And just to stress, the underlying elements here are minimal verb stems. There's no smaller verb inside here. There are morphemes. This is a morpheme that means walk, but it can never be used below. It's a bound final. And so this is the verb, and as you can see, you can imagine really quickly, you're going to annotate, you might say walk, and then you're going to have some kind of, node that says mod, and you're going to say walk upwards as a direction and walk downwards, and so forth and so on, or actually the colon location or colon direction. But you also have these even more complex forms, which are these noun incorporation forms. And so I can say something like "Hinakati," which means the leaves are yellow, talking about some bush or some tree. Or "Batkati," the leaves are red. And then here I can use this "bat" red again, but I can switch out the leaf medial for a wood or bark medial and say "Batkati," which means the bark or the wood is red.
So is some compounding happening here, or?
Sorry?
Is there any compounding happening here?
No, there's not compounding. So these are minimal stems. This is like a morpheme for yellow, a morpheme for leaf, and a morpheme for appearance. But none of them exist as independent words, so you really can't talk about compounding.
Would they never occur as independent words?
No.
So if I want to talk about live in other contexts, what will I do?
There is an independent word for leaf, which I could use in say a less. This is a pretty common thing to say, and so you tend to do it in this kind of incorporating way. But if the leaves are very crinkly or something like that, you would probably just use the independent noun for leaf and an independent verb for crinkly.
And that leaf and this leaf are morphologically connected, or yes?
Actually, they're not. They're two separate forms. So that's not always the case with this incorporation, but it is sometimes the case that the incorporated noun has a different contracted or even completely separate form.
They're all bound.
They're all bound, yes. So all these are bound. Okay. And also, I just want to point out this raises all kinds of really interesting questions about how to gloss these things and how to approach them, because you might want to say it has yellow leaves. And then you want to say, oh, in UMR, I'm going to set up like a have 91, and I'm going to have something about possession, and it's going to possess leaves, and the leaves are going to be modified as yellow. And that seems like it would work for all of these, right? It has red leaves, it has red bark, and so forth. But then just quickly, here's another one that I could say, the Melapesol, and it means grass, that's what this bound morpheme is thick. So now, it's like, well, it has thick grass, right? You can't really set up a have 91 for that because there's no it possessor in this case. So then you could say there is thick grass at this location. So maybe you want to set up some kind of existence 91 form, which is predicating something about the location, that the location has grass at it, and then you have to modify that to say the grass at this location is thick. But right off, there's really interesting semantic questions that get raised, and in particular, what are the Arapaho people actually saying when they say these things, right? Because this is an English translation, but I think this is the best translation. So I'm treating this as basically a grammatical subject that's incorporated into the verb. So somewhat easier to deal with are things that are incorporated as an object. So here's some examples. Again, these are all bound forms with minimal stems. So I'm watering horses. So here's the horses part. I'm feeding horses. So exactly parallel except for the first part. And then just another example, I'm starting a fire. And so these are very clearly, as arguments, grammatical direct objects of the verb. Then I can have something like this, where I say I am lowering something with a rope from above, or again, I'm poking around in the ashes of a fire for something with some kind of stick-like object, rope-like object, or I'm getting something out of the water. So this is to get or obtain, and this is making it a transitive verb, and this is specifically saying that I'm getting it out of a liquid medium. So all of these things also are incorporation, and raise yet another set of issues. And then we have some examples I mentioned with natural forces. So I finished something off by heat, I finished it off by wind, or I didn't, the wind did it, and then it was finished off by some kind of water force. And again, the glosses become an interesting question cross-linguistically, is how do you want to describe this? I would argue really that although in Arapaho, these are exactly the same, the finished part, and then it just has the way in which something was finished off or gotten rid of. When we gloss into English, we end up with wiped out, burned up, demolished. We get completely different lexical items. And so English describes these differences lexically and incorporates the mode of action into the lexical item in a way that is very invisible, right? We don't think about when we're speaking English or Spanish or something like that. Typically, the way in which these items like wiped out require a certain kind of force to do the wiping out. Burning up is a little bit more obviously, and so forth and so on. So this is a fascination for me as a linguist, not as a computer scientist, because I'm not one, I'm a linguist, is the way that different languages, of course, code different things like the mode of action in their vocabularies. And Arapaho just codes it very clearly, which makes it especially interesting in that regard. We can also have things like I have a broken arm, or I have fallen down and broken my arm. And in this case, you can see that this is an actual visible stem, but I can then take it and I can add something else onto it, which is a resultative. And I can also add something on here, which is producing a transitive verb. So I'll have broken your arm. So again, we have broken arm, transitivizing, I did it to you. And broken arm, resultative means I fell down and it happened to me. Other things you can do, I'm putting on my pants. So there's the pants part, and even something like she is my mother, or literally I have her as a mother, and we have that incorporated. So the incorporation includes a lot of different kind of patterns and constructions. It's not something where you can just say, oh, I know for sure it's going to be like a direct object or something like that. And finally, we can have constructions in which we have an initial noun that's incorporated. So we have like act like a cowboy, act like a woman, act like a child, act like a crazy person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is completely productive, so you can put in anything you want. So how do we solve these problems in UMR for Arapaho or a similar language? So first thing, polysynthetic verbs do not need to be morphologically decomposed. You're going to treat them as a single lexical item. And just purely from a linguistic standpoint, there's lots of evidence that most of these forms are in fact known by the speakers as full forms, and that they're not really created syntactically on the fly, although you can do that. And I think an interesting analogy is English, where we talk about things like shoe shopping and car shopping, which people recognize clearly and use all the time. And it's possible to say things like sock shopping or belt shopping, and you understand that, but at the same time, you can go through quite a big corpus and never find belt shopping as an example. And I would argue it's not really lexicalized in any meaningful way. And so that's a little bit how Algonquian incorporation works, is that the incorporated items are common, everyday things that are used repeatedly. That's why you incorporate them and reduce them down. But at the same time, creative speakers will do things like, say things like belt shopping, where they put something new in there that is appreciated by other speakers because of the creativity. I want to stress other languages may have more syntactic types of non-incorporation that are even freer than the Algonquian languages. So Iroquoian languages have, I would say, probably more productive incorporation than Algonquian, and you might have to treat those languages differently than you would an Algonquian language. But although the languages, although these forms don't need to be morphologically decomposed, they have to be semantically decomposed. So these medials are arguments, and they must be treated as arguments. So topics, as I said, I would argue should be treated as grammatical subjects. So you have got the leaves are yellow, et cetera, and I want to stress that this can be used for a single tree, but it can also be used for the season of fall. So again, how do you, what's the it has yellow leaves when we're talking about the leaves are yellow right now in the world because it's fall. And so it's a predication, it's not really a have 91 type of construction. The objects are much more uncontroversially a grammatical object, and you're going to treat it in that way. So watering the horses or starting the fire. So here's a graph, and this is here's a sentence where they tied up their horses, and you can see this form here. So we've already seen this achel, meaning horse, a bunch of times. Actually means domestic animal. And then this is the tie part, and you see how it was graphed. So there's no, the word is taken as a whole. There's no attempt to deconstruct it morphologically. And then we have, third person plural did the tying, and then we have the theme is the animal, which is plural, and the animal, of course, is the horse. And so we do actually have a node for this, even though there's nothing in the sentence that's referring outside the verb to the horses. And then we have the place, and so forth and so on. So you can see how the graphing works. So I'm going kind of quick, but let me just stop real quick. Are questions at this point? Okay. Was that about to be a question?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a small one. Will you share the slides?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay. So, and this is
I have a small question regarding this. Maybe one more slide back, please. No, one more. I'm sorry. I just didn't want to interrupt you. One more. Where you show us the glossings of the sentence about this craziness. Do you remember the woman crazy person, crazy man? Yes, this one. And in some cases, maybe one more back. I'm very sorry. Yes, this one. For example, this he, no, if, o. There is the sign up of the o.
yeah.
But the second one, with double o, there is nothing after.
Oh.
Is it something what I need to know?
No, these are just inflectional differences. So this is just a glottal stop.
Okay, glottal stop.
Yeah, and this is just actually basically like a theta.
Okay, this is.
ITA theta stop.
Okay, perfect, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the glottal stop, and if there is a double O, there's nothing, it's just normal O.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Yeah. But those are just inflections. So, other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, is part of that requiring morphological decomposition enabling a fluent speaker who's not a linguist to make a UMR graph, or would that not be a barrier?
So it's a fluent Arapaho speaker. I have found they are not necessarily great at decomposing, even as fluent speakers. And part of that is that most of the fluent speakers don't read or write, and so they're not I think that is a crucial element of being able to decompose. But just more generally, I, in fact, as a linguist, was kind of surprised when people would say, well, this is how you say it, and it's some, 27-letter long word, and I, as a naive linguist, want to say, well, what part of it means this? And they're like, I don't know. That's just how we say it, right? There's a lot less ability to decompose by native speakers than I would have expected coming into it. Which is obviously is a problem if you want to try to have a native speaker do your UMR and produce your lexicon. So there are also non-decomposable verbs which refer to action on objects. And so here's an example where the sentence is, take this person's hand, like you're going to shake their hand. Take their hand in the proper fashion or shake their hand. And so the first verb here is get or take, hand, and then it's transitivized. So it's got it incorporated down. And then over here, however, shake someone's hand, there's no incorporation for hand or any kind of way to break that down. It's just a verb which means shake somebody's hand. But they're treated in exactly the same way. So here we have an op1 and an op2 for the sentence. And op1 is, we have the imperative for take someone's hand. We have the you singular as the person being told to do it. And then here's the theme. Is the thing that belongs to the person, which is the hand. And then down here for op2, we have shake someone's hand. And again, we have imperative, we have another actor, which is the same actor. We have a theme again, and it's the same theme. So even though there's nothing in that verb that is morphologically referring to hands, semantically, that's clearly what it does, and you want to capture that semantics. And so there is a theme here, parallel to the theme here. So it's not really incorporation per se that's the issue, it's semantics that's the issue. So, so we've talked about subject incorporation, object incorporation. What about like means of action incorporation, which is something people think about less often. So the way Arapaho creates verbs is it takes something like this underlying form, which means to separate or break some kind of stick-like object, and then you add a final, which indicates the means of action. So this is by tool, by hand, by blade, by some kind of heat source. And so you end up with a verb, the wahawa, I hacked it off, the benawa, I broke it off, the bechawa, I sliced it off, and the hawa, I burned it off. So you could argue that these things are incorporated in some sense, and that we need to reflect this in the UMR. But the language expert, which is me in this particular case, is saying I'm dubious that these kind of things are salient enough in most cases that you would actually want to put them in a graph. But some of them are narrower than others, and you might want to. So by blade, maybe yes, or by fire source. Whereas by hand, I mean, I think that would be pretty redundant to put that into a graph. So counter argument with, here's a verb which is, here's the same thing, the removal. This is incorporated for head, and here's the by blade. It's like the dashes got messed up here. But anyway, break or remove a stick-like thing, dash, head, dash, by blade, dot, causative. And in this particular case, the annotator who I'm working with decided we actually needed to create a rule set for this with an actor, an undergoer, a theme, and an argument for the particular instrument or blade being used. So there's no single answer here, but you have to weigh, again, I don't think so myself. It's pretty non-salient to say by hand, that's just almost like a default, but maybe by blade is important enough. Although really, how else do you decapitate someone? I don't know. So here's the result of the annotation. So you have your verb, so first person singular, then you have your theme, which is the head, which is part of the body, and then you have the source, the person whose head it was, and down here you have an instrument, which is underneath the source. The instrument was used on that source, on the person. And that's how you would specify that. So on the other hand, I would argue that when you have a medial means of action, that's more salient than a final. The finals are almost like lexicalized and automatic. The medials are much more like a choice that people have to stress something. And so if you have something like lowering someone by rope, or shattering something with a tool, you are going to want to have that. And I didn't do the full graph, but you would have your instrument node as well as your actor and your theme. So this is lower by rope, and aspect and modal strength, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, I'll skip that because I'm going to get going. And to conclude all this, I hope you're seeing that there are some linguistic choices that have to be made that can be pretty subtle, and that there are multiple ways to handle some of these graphings. So a final example of that is verbal classifiers. So I can say, in any algonquin language, I can say something like, the snake is slithering down the slope. So this snake is going downwards in a kind of a walking way. We saw that already, but a rope-like walking way. And so I translate that as slithering, and then as opposed to walking. And here's another example. I can say that this rope is strong in a rope-like way. So there's a simple verb, to be strong, and then this verb, which has this incorporated rope-like thing in it, but otherwise looks pretty similar to this verb. So I would argue that this kind of verbal class, and it's a classifier because I've got both this in there, rope-like, and I'm actually saying rope. Now I could have said chain or fishing line or watering hose. There's dozens of different nouns I could have put in there after this verb. And after this verb as well, instead of snake, I could have said caterpillar or worm or whatever. So that's why these are classifiers, right? You have both the nominal element and the separate noun. So in that particular case, not working. There we go. I would argue that these kind of classifiers are adding lexical specificity to the verb, or some more precise quality. And again, in English, that gets translated as slither versus walk. There's just a completely separate lexical item. And that those, therefore, need to be separate in the lexicon. You want to say something like walk in a rope-like way or something like that. But you're not going to add an argument in this particular case because there's already a separate noun stated in the sentence, so you're not claiming this is an argument. However, Arapaho drops overt nouns very commonly in everyday speech, and so what happens if you say something like, I'm watering these cattle, so classifier for domestic animals, and an overt noun for the type of animal, the cows. It's all good, but then the person might then say, later I'm going to water them too, and then, so then I'm going to go feed them. Well, the cattle are implicitly still there in some sense, but so is this really a classifier use, or is this kind of turned into a noun incorporation use? So there's linguistic subtleties you have to think about. I would argue that what you should do is you should gloss these verbs water.livestock and feed.livestock, and that you do want to have cattle in a node as a specific object in all three cases. So, okay, so let's see, it's about 30 minutes. How much more? 5 minutes?
No, you get an hour.
Oh, I get an hour?
Yeah.
Oh. No, I didn't realize I had that much time. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll stop right there. So that's an introduction to how you might handle different types of nominal incorporation in UMR. Questions? Thoughts? Yes?
So far I know, so that is the Arapaho verbs that can be classified based on the animacy. So how can we actually incorporate that in UMR?
Okay, so that is something which I didn't specifically talk about, but an example would be in this particular verb, this T is indicating that it's an animate thing that's doing the action, but there would be a way to have like an inanimate thing do this action as well. I don't think that needs to be incorporated really at all.
Okay.
So. Yeah, I would have to scribble something on the board real quick, but Arapaho verbs change their shape depending on whether the subject is animate or inanimate. And in the lexicon, you're probably going to need to specify that, right? So in other words, like I would have hawachesan means slither, and hawachesana is an inanimate form of the same verb, and I'd have to specify slither.inanimate as opposed to slither.animate. But I don't think the graphs need to reflect that in any way. Because it's not really a semantic issue. It's really it's a formal structural issue of the verb stems.
So another question is, you show the example of the reduplication, I guess. So
I don't think I have any.
not this one. So
Yeah.
maybe before the last slide. So, sorry, before this one, I guess. Later I will water them again.
Yeah.
Is there?
Oh no, this is actually not reduplication. This is the thing for feed right here,
Okay.
and this is the domestic animals. Algonquin languages do have reduplication, and you might want to consider how you're going to handle that. One obvious way to do it is in UMR you have a colon expressive, and that's I think often a good way to handle the reduplication. But really, that's an entirely I don't have a talk on that today. But everything I just said here about noun incorporation, the single biggest lesson I wanted you to take home from this is that it's not a single phenomenon and a single construction, that it can be indicating multiple different things that you have to treat in different kinds of ways. And the same thing would be true with reduplication. Some kinds of reduplication intensify an action, like I'm hitting someone over and over, but others actually increase the object. So like if I say like I have a broken arm, if I reduplicate that, it means I have broken arms, plural. And so that's going to be a different kind of annotation, obviously, than hitting the person over and over. So that's my take-home lesson for a lot of these things.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
I have a question on the next slide,
Which one?
this one.
Okay.
So this is really, I guess, a UMR question, but would there be a difference in the graph between how we annotate the overt object and the covert object?
So no, I don't think so. I think you're
It's
giving
just
yourself
there.
just extra trouble if you're trying to. Yeah, that's purely a structural issue. It's not a semantic issue.
I'm just gonna put I forgot to announce the schedule change. We made a small change to the schedule this morning. I'll just write it up here, what the plan
I have a
is.
question.
Okay.
Like in Urdu also we have light verbs and sometimes verb phrases, and it's partially conveying the meaning in morphemes and tense and aspect. So how would we deal them in UMR?
Okay, that's coming. So what I'm going to talk about now is agglutination, which is the stuff that's added on, the prefixes and suffixes and so forth, as opposed to everything we've talked about now is internal to a verb stem. Agglutination involves a bunch of different stuff in Algonquin languages. You have temporal and aspectual markers, which are prefixes. You also have pronominal affixes, which can be either suffixes or prefixes. You also have modality markers, which again can be either prefixes or suffixes. And then you have lexical prefixes on nouns and verbs, and then you can also have proclitics, which are mostly of a modal nature. So the main thing I want you to be thinking about here is the difference between abstract, kind of edge stuff, and more like lexical modifiers, which tend to be more internal to the word. We have a verb stem, and we have the lexical stuff, which is always a prefix, and we have the abstract prefixes and suffixes on the far edges of the form. So that's how Algonquin languages work. And we're going to have to make a big distinction between those abstract things and the lexical prefixes in terms of how to treat them. So an example of temporal and aspectual markers, again, just something like this. I walk, there's past tense. I walk habitually, there's no perfective. And then I can combine these. I was walking, or I would habitually walk. Either meaning's possible. And you get something like that. So these are going to be pretty straightforward. I'll have some slides that show how to solve the issues. We have the pronominal affixes. So these are the things I've underlined here. So I walked, but we inclusive walked. I am not walking, and now it's turned into a prefix, notice, with the negative. And then we inclusive did not walk, so now I've got another prefix because it's negative, and I've got my past tense in here now, and this becomes a circumfix to indicate we inclusive negative. So not really interested in the details of the grammar, obviously, but just want to point out these prefixes and suffixes that are floating around. There are no pronouns in Arapaho, and so no true pronouns, and so these things that are underlined are not agreement markers. They are truly pronominal affixes. So we also, as I mentioned, we've got tense, we've got aspect, we've also got modality. And modality occurs in two different ways. The more abstract forms, like a iterative, a subjunctive. I have a separate inflection that indicates one singular plus subjunctive. And then this is an iterative. Again, got a separate inflection indicating the person plus the iterative. Whereas in these more kind of like lexical modality, like I should walk, I have a prefix, and it's right before the verb. And so here we have the I should walk, and likewise wanting to walk, I. So in both cases, the prefix comes right before the verb, and wanting to, I'm taking as a much more lexical kind of modality as opposed to subjunctive or iterative or something like that. And then we have lexical prefixes on nouns and verbs, and so we get things like I am still walking. So it's aspect, but it's a more lexicalized kind of aspect. I walked to here, so we have this indicating to the location of the speaker. I started walking, again, lexical aspect, or something gets more at the question from the back, like I whistled as I walked. So I take this, which is actually a verb stem, and I put it in front of this other verb stem, and this really would be compounding, and I get walking and whistling at the same time. And finally, we get proclitics, which always come before the person markers, and so wishing I in the past that it was an us, and potentially or dubitative walk, et cetera, et cetera. So these are just some of the types of stuff that you can get on an Algonquian verb, and the question is how to handle it. So I really believe that if you don't understand the morphology well enough to take this stuff off, it's just not going to be useful, either for you as an analytic tool or for anybody else who wants to use the data, because you're going to end up with just massive numbers of forms, all of them beginning with like ni, which is a past tense marker or something like that, and what real value is that? So you must be able to recognize and remove this outer morphology, right? Unlike the verb stem, where I said, do not worry about the morphology, don't take anything out or remove it, it's just a semantic issue of making sure it shows up in the graph. In this case, because you're building a lexicon, you've got to take this stuff off. And the famous thing about there's 360,000 ways to say go in Navajo, the same thing would work for Arapaho, so we take a stem like see someone, so it has to be an animate thing that's being seen. And then here's just a few common things you might say in Arapaho. And as you can see, the stem is buried under multiple layers of prefixes and suffixes. And even in 100,000 lines, you may never get more than one example of any of these. And you've also got infix that's going on as well right there. So, and on top of which you also have constant mutation going on. So the E is causing the W to turn into a B right there. Whereas over here you have an O, and so the W stays in place. So, and ideally, that should be the citation form that you want to come up with. I don't think it's a disaster if you end up with two citation forms for a while, and you've got a B form and a W form. That's pretty easy to fix. Whereas if you put every single one of these things in there as a separate lexical entry, then you truly have a disaster in terms of usefulness. So this would be an example that. If you tried to do it that way, right? So you should all come over and tell me directly. Not an uncommon thing to say, but it's just not reasonable as a lexical entry. Temporal and special agglutination are really no problem whatsoever. Because even English, right? I ran, I run. I mean, you've got the semantics embedded in there. So all you do is on document level annotation, you indicate the temporality in terms of the annotation. And likewise with aspect, you have a sentence level aspect, which doesn't necessarily correspond exactly to the Arapaho labels, but nevertheless, it's pretty straightforward to group those together. And in fact, what you can do is you can actually just make a list of all your different prefixes, and this is the gloss of them, and then this is the UMR mapping. And so you can pretty much automate this. So a narrative past tense, it is said to have happened, but I didn't see it. It was going to be temporal and document creation time before, et cetera, right? A future tense, effective, we're going to call it aspect performance, and so forth and so on. So that makes things pretty easy. So pronominal affixes, again, are not a problem whatsoever. And just as a quick example, right, we have a sentence like, I will tell you something, and we have this FN, which means first singular to two singular. So in the graph, of course, we just have an actor who is first person singular, a recipient of the story, second person singular, and a theme, which is the story itself. So very straightforward.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah, sorry.
The last one with a dash, one S and two S, does it mean the both of them are the same? I mean, this one, the last.
Yeah. What that means actually is that the thing before the graph, before the slash is the actor, and the thing after the slash is the undergoer.
Oh, okay. For example, me and the second person.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So I see you, Nanaha Bethan.
You.
Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I haven't really tried to explain the grammar much because it's.
One more just to
Yeah.
clarify, maybe. Let's imagine if there is a plural, I mean you as a plural. In
Yeah.
this case, it's going to be one S and then dash and the plural one.
2P.
Two
Right.
P.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then that's a completely separate morpheme, right?
Yeah. I would
Like
have
those are not compositional.
I would have to add an EE to what you have there, and that would turn it into a plural.
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yep. Okay. So here's again a subtlety that is not so straightforward. That's what I've just been talking about. So in all Algonquian languages, you can add a secondary final, or in some cases it's primary, but usually it's secondary, to a verb stem to indicate that you have an indefinite object as opposed to a definite one, or that you have, and by that I mean non-identifiable. So instead of I see the chair, I can add an ending and say I see something, or I see things. And so there's semantically still I'm seeing something, but I've de-emphasized and demoted whatever I'm seeing. And then an opposite of this TII, which indicates something specific. And so in this particular sentence you have JST, so this is listen to, but really a better gloss would be listen to something specific. So it's an inanimate verb grammatically. It only has one element marked on it, unlike the one you were just talking about where you have the slash and the two things marked, so it's transitive. But it's pseudo-transitive. In other words, this indicates that there is something specific. But there's no inflection to indicate that. So here you see how it's glossed, right? It's imperative, but there's an experiencer, second plural, and there's going to be a stimulus, which is something that the person is going to have to hear or listen to. And so where did the stimulus come from in the graph? It came from knowing that this is indicating something specific. So again, there's a certain sense in which you have to extract, a little bit like noun incorporation, information about the arguments from the nature of the verb itself. And I think that's one of the harder things, is to deal with that. I think the inflections are easy. So modality markers, we have two different types. And again, this is my big take-home point, right? There's the more abstract stuff, and there's the more lexical stuff. So for the more abstract stuff, it's actually pretty easy. So you have a polarity function in UMR, and you have a modal string function and various things like that. It's pretty easy to take the abstract stuff and do it that way. So here we have a sentence, do you know him? And by the way, this is a quote, so that's what's going on here. This is indicating a quote. And then the actual part we're interested in is down here. So here's the verb for know, and the polarity is a no. So that's how this KEI, interrogative to singular, is getting expressed, and then also there's experiencers to singular. So that's how you're going from that to this. So I think that's pretty straightforward. And again, just like with the temporal and aspectual, you can do the same thing with the modal modifier. So here's just a list of some of these common things. And you would say, okay, well, if it's a negative, we're going to use the modal strength and call it full negative, of course. And if it's this, unable, modal strength is going to be neutral negative. And then, might is going to be neutral affirmative, et cetera, et cetera. So again, you can just set these up, and there are like dozens or hundreds of these, but you can do a graph like this, and it makes the cognitive load of the annotating much easier. The lexical prefixes, yep, I'm going pretty fast again. I'll stop. Okay, so now we're moving away from the more abstract to the more lexical. So we can have something like dog, and then we can have like big dog. And we can have a word like take, or we can say take it slowly, pick it up slowly. So two choices. I'm agnostic on which one you use. You could treat these as single lexical items, a big dog. That'd be fine. Or you could treat these as a single dog, which is got a modifier, which is big. And I think probably the second way takes more time, but is more specific. The first way, as a first pass, would probably be fine. These are lexical items, in my judgment, in Arapaho. They're not compounded. What am I trying to say? Yeah, this is a bound element. This is a single noun. So this is not a compound in the traditional sense, in which you take two independent nouns and put them together. And so since it's a single nominal stem, it would be tempting to treat it that way. And I think that would be legitimate from a linguistic analysis perspective, but from a semantic graphing perspective, where you're trying to capture as much specificity as possible, I think it's better to have the node in the same mod, and then big is modifying dog. So here's another example of that kind of thing. So we have, he is going to go over to the enemy, and you can see up there, future, and then this is a deictic, meaning from the location of the speaker, and he arrives at some place, to be singular. And how is it handled in the graph? Again, this is a quote, so ignore that part. Down here's what we're interested in. So what's the theme is what's being said as a quote, and they kept, the annotator kept the from here and the arrive together. Again, treating it as kind of a single form, rather than trying to do something where you separate it out that form. Even though technically that is the minimal verb stem, the citation verb stem.
Can you go back to the previous slide, please?
Yes.
So here, Heth is dog, right?
Right.
Now, when you are insinuating big dog, sheepdog, this H is dropped.
Right.
And that's why you are saying Heth is a bound morph.
Right.
But I can also argue it is a morphophonological change.
Right. Yeah.
And whenever you do some compounding or some sandhi, I don't know what it's called in.
Right.
So some morphophonological change do take place.
Right.
And so then H becomes a allomorph of Heth.
Right.
Now, will I consider that allomorph to be a bound morph? Or I can also argue it's a morphophonological change. And H is, so it is a compound. I'm just trying
Right.
to think.
Right.
Okay, I have a question here. And then what about collocations? That these are lexical prefixes, for example, but we have some collocations also. So how would we deal them if they come like whiteboard, for example?
If we have what?
Collocations.
But,
Whiteboard, blackboard.
oh, blackboard. Okay. Yeah.
Collocations in English or
Okay.
in any language, in Urdu. So how would we deal them?
Okay. So in terms of answering your question, there is a kind of a complicated answer to your question that I don't really want to go into, but there are cases where you keep the H and then you add additional stuff, and the H undergoes a different development than what happens here. And so analytically, it makes sense to treat this the way I'm treating it. But your question is completely legitimate one that I think is exactly the right question to ask. Just for the sake of Algonquian efficiency, we're treating it this way. I think that's probably the better analysis. But yeah, for UMR, that's exactly the question you should ask yourself, right? And as far as collocations like Blackboard, that I don't think we're saying that the board is black there, right? We're talking about a blackboard. And so I don't think you want to set up something that says board and then mod black, right? Whereas in this particular case, you know, is a big dog a collocation or is it a modified form? I think to me this is more like truly a modified form in which we're just talking about some generic dog, which happens to be big. We're not thinking about a particular species of dog that would be different from other dogs in the way that Blackboard would be different.
The question is, what is a concept? What is an atomic concept?
Right.
What is a complex concept? Do we have any notion of complex concept and atomic concept? Do we need it?
In UMR, you mean?
First, though, yeah, in understanding.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think really you just have to go back to the linguistic distinction between a true lexicalized compound and some kind of modified form. So in English, you can talk about like a bluebird. And when you say that, you're not talking about a bird which happens to be blue. If I pronounce it in the way I just did it, bluebird, you're talking about a specific species, Cialis mexicana, right? And so we would want to argue that bluebird is a unified concept
Yes.
in the same way as blackboard.
Yes.
Whereas a blue bird is a bird which is modified. So that's really the only thing I can say is you know, if it's lexicalized, I would not treat it as modified.
Yes.
The problem with the repo is, what do we mean by lexicalized? Because we have so many of these stems floating around, and there's a certain degree of syntactic compositionality that can occur on the fly. So it's sometimes hard to say whether something is lexicalized or it's created in the moment as the speaker's talking. I don't know, is that halfway good answer?
Do you have something that's
Yeah.
something like a small dog, please?
Yeah, you could say a small dog. But actually, that is more lexicalized, interestingly. That usually just means puppy specifically. So, I mean, you're, in a certain sense, you're relying on speaker judgments, right, about what's lexicalized and what's not. But I would say in this language, the lexicalization boundary is not nearly as clear as it is in English, the way I see it. Okay, so the hardest thing, and gets back to one of your earlier questions, is what happens when we have a modification that results in verbs which are double action or dual action. So like this example, fall down, or have a broken arm, but what if I put it all together and I say, fall down and break my arm? Or I can talk about walking, and I can talk about crying a lot, but what about walking around crying a lot? Or whistling, but what about make a whistling sound as one talks? So these are completely legitimate Arapaho verbs, and what do you do with them? So what you have to do is so here's an example, kind of a simple example. So he went to ask somebody. So you see up there ask and then allative, so go to ask, all combined. Do you want to treat that as a single lexical item, one in natan? Or do you want to do it as two separate things? We're going to have an and then we're going to have a have goal. And that's the allative is treated as a have goal 91. And then the argument, and then we have the place is where we're going to go to, et cetera, et cetera. And then down here we have op2, and we have our ask, and we have all that. So we have to break that word down into these two different ops, which in many languages would be two separate verbs entirely, which are kind of happening simultaneously. He was running and crying, I could say in English, and we would do it exactly the same way. But in Arapaho, we can even do that for things that are modifying lexically. Another example, so you can search for and see a white streak that stretches all the way across the sky, talking about the Milky Way. So put this imperfective, search for and see, use singular, this white streak.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Isn't this number 9? I mean, this is then 1, 2, 3 tokens. Am I right?
The 9 is just the number of the sentence. That's
No, I mean, for me was the sentence number 9, sorry.
Yeah.
Or maybe unit number 9. But just to get, it means if I'm doing the indexes as for the to annotate, to start annotating, it's going to be index 1, index 2, and index 3. Am I right? And just ignore the punctuation word. I mean, dot.
Right.
3 indexes. And could you please go back to one slide back? No, no, no.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, this one. This is the sentence number 116. There are 4 indexes, but I can see only one token.
Yeah.
Punctuation, I think, is 4.
Okay, the punctuation is number 4. Where is index 1, index 2, and index 3? Because,
Oh,
So here is the knit one.
The 4 is the period. Yeah,
It's just not aligned.
Yeah.
no, no,
Yeah.
I mean,
So
if I may,
it's 1, 2, 3, 4.
It's tab separated.
this is 1.
Yeah.
Ah, okay, 2.
Yeah.
In verse 3? No.
No, it's just not. It's not aligned correctly. See, this is 3, and then this is 4. The punctuation.
1, 2, 3. Okay, now I get.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No.
No, because for me it was okay. Now I get that. I mean, there is written sentence, and there is only one word. I know there are some sentences only with one word.
Yeah.
But there are 4 indexes. That's why I was a little bit confused.
Yeah. Don't worry about some of these indexes.
Okay.
So I'll just finish up quickly, but exactly the same thing as the previous one. We have an op1 with the searching for, we had an op2 with the seeing, so we just broken the single word down into 2 ops with 2 actions going on, and yet another one, so the 4 little things came over and poured out their anger, all one word, so we just break that down into a have goal, which is this again, so we're using the exact same annotation, and we have the op2, which is down here. And so another possibility that you may want to consider, however, rather than that, is to actually create a role set. So again, the decision was to create a role set. And so you have something like Mr. Fox, kid's story, started to run again. And so we have these aliases, and we say the experiencer is the viewer, this, et cetera, et cetera. But the point of this becomes clearer right here. So we have started to run, we have the actor, the fox, this fox modified, and the arg2 is going to be the action that this is referring back to. And so arg1 is the event in particular, and so in other words, if I say run again, then what is again really referring to? It's referring back to a previous event of running that was happening, and now that event is going to restart. And so we want to be able to capture that cross-sentence nature of the again, and so that's why in this particular case, rather than doing op1 and op2 or something like that, or just a pure modification, you actually set the role set up to allow you to refer back to the previous event and make it clear that it's co-referent to the previous event. And then finally, another approach, a different approach still, we have a sentence like the wood tick wanted to race the fox. So we have a want to, which is a prefix, a lexical prefix, and the question is how do we handle that? And the argument is in this particular case we want to handle that as its own separate head verb, right? And then the experiencer of wanting and the stimulus of wanting is the racing, and then we have the tick is going to race the fox all down here, and then you can see the sentence level graph that explains all that. So really quickly, what you notice is that the lexical items, whether they're modal or aspectual or anything else, are the more challenging thing to deal with in this particular case, whereas those abstract outside stuff are pretty easy to deal with, and you can just set up the tables and so forth. And prophetics, don't need to talk about that. Okay, so that's my quick hour on thinking about how to handle especially the lexical modification of the verbs in this kind of a language. Okay, last questions or?
Can you break the rule set for again? Like you have again. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Actually, this is a little bit too specific, isn't it? For.
I guess my question is again a verb in the language, or it's not, but it's treat it as some predicate.
Yeah, it never occurs independently, so it can't be treated as a verb. I mean, from a purely linguistic standpoint.
It's also not predicating,
Not predicate.
so we wouldn't treat it as a UMR event. It wouldn't get an aspectual annotation. But this is one of those cases where having a rule set just means you get to specify arguments rather than that you're asserting that it's a predicate.
No, I think this is interesting because so this, you're getting into the discourse treatback territory where you have connectives which are treated as some sort of predicate which have arguments. So again, it's one of those connectives where you imply there's one event and then it repeated itself. So so you can also do the same thing for things like still, like, because that implies that something happening, but you're still in that state.
Right.
However, right, so that's an obvious one. So
Yeah.
it takes two parts.
Yeah.
Or really you want a propositional argument. Right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So it looks like you're kind of extending this to the argument structure to the discourse connectors, essentially.
Yeah, basically. At least for these ones, especially these kind of lexical aspect ones like still or go on again and start up again or do it again or finish doing whatever it was you were doing in the previous sentence, things like that.
It's really similar to the discourse relation rule sets.
Is this only, how many of these kind of words that you do it this way?
Oh, there are only a couple.
Only a couple.
Yeah.
No, I didn't understand why it is a discourse phenomenon. Again,
It's not, so it's a discourse connective, right? So when you say again, it means something like that happened before. So in some sense, you're connecting those two things together. Like when you see still, it means that it's in some previous state is still in that state, right? And however, when you see however, it means something happened and then something a little different happened. So it's connecting two things. That's
so now if I say I eat twice in a day, and then eat again.
that is a little, I think that's a little different.
Doesn't
Yeah.
the two in this case
Mm.
talk about the frequency of the event?
Yes, but usually in that case you don't need two clauses, right? So when you say again, you have two clauses. You say something that happened.
So you are actually equating it with also kind of thing.
Yeah, also
So
kind of, yes,
also
yes.
then there is something
Yes,
and
exactly.
then also.
Yes, yeah.